Hello, everyone. Welcome to the GISB Off the Pitch podcast. Now, a little bit about the podcast. Through the podcast, we interview industry professionals in their area of expertise, and we try to enhance your knowledge about the business of sport and help you understand where you can find your place in this sports industry of India and how we can work towards making sure that you better equip yourself to get the job that you really, really want. Right now, about the topic, we have had a couple of podcasts before. We've talked about fan engagement, where we've talked about how global entities can enter the market of India. Today, we're going to talk about an area that I really love, which is sponsorship. Right now, why I love sponsorship? It's to tell you, I feel like it's a very organic aspect of the sports industry, which isn't really difficult from life, where you're partnering up with brands and they're growing organic day by day, where you're giving each other, you're taking things from each other, you're growing together, objectives, support, and basically ensuring that both of you meet the goals that you want, exactly like life, right? So now that's why I love sponsorship. Today, one of the sponsorship that really stands out for me is Manchester United's partnership with Apollo Tyres, right? And on that note, we have today's guest, Mr. Remus D'Cruz. A little bit about Mr. Remus. Hi, Remus. Hope you're doing well. A little bit about Mr. Remus, great individual with loads of experience, about a decade and a half of experience in the sports industry. A little bit of education background. He had his BCom degree and then he did his PG diploma in marketing. After that, he started his journey in the sports industry in 2007, working with ICC's commercial space. And he worked there for a long period of time. After 5 years, he came back to India and then became the head of marketing for Nike. And he worked with the Board of Cricket Control. He worked with the Federation of Football. He worked with numerous athletes. And after that, he worked for a couple of ISL teams as well as their head of marketing and sponsorship division too. And then he worked with the Hockey India League, where he was head of the operations. And finally, in 2019, he came and he joined Apollo Tyres at the head of marketing of sports and community management. Throughout this, there were numerous consulting jobs that he obviously did, but there's an immense amount of experience of 1.5 decades that we have to learn from today. And really glad to have you here, Remus. Really looking forward to this session. Thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. So without further ado, let's jump to the questions, right? So Remus, really glad to have you here. We're going to talk about sponsorship. We're going to talk about how the pandemic affected the sponsorship. How do you think the sponsorship industry has changed? And what the future of the industry looks like, right? So the first question that really everybody would like to know about is the pandemic, right? If nobody knew it was coming, all the sporting events had stopped. And in 2020, the Indian sports industry saw 34% decrease in the sponsorship valuation, right? Now, how did the industry react to this? From somebody who was personally involved at that period of time, how did you see the industry react to this whole pandemic and lockdown that came from?
So as you correctly said, right, nobody saw this coming, and it's been unprecedented, right? Just in terms of, and that word's being used so often, unprecedented. In terms of how do you approach a situation like this, right? At some level, there's this whole human approach in terms of you understand what's happening with businesses, you understand what's happening in terms of investments, but there's objectives that you need to also keep hitting and meeting. So in terms of the way I saw it pan out was the long-term players, right, who had strategic plans in terms of their sports investments, who had a long-term view and why they were invested in certain sports properties, they stuck on. People who were looking at, or brands who were looking at the sponsorship more from a tactical perspective, awareness, just need some eyeballs, high visibility. Those were the brands that looked at pulling out, and that's the two buckets you can look at when you're looking at what brands did during the pandemic. And having said that, even the brands who were there for the long term, they renegotiated rights. They looked at what is possible to do in terms of activation. Obviously, a lot of rights weren't delivered, so there were discountings that happened. And there were additional rights that were given in some other places. So it was horses for courses in that sense. So you had to look at various different properties, what worked, what didn't work. Every conversation was, unique, and you had to approach it in that perspective. So I think the industry is pulling out of it, not only in India, but globally as well. And we've seen new avenues, come out from it. So
Interesting. So on that note, we saw a lot of sponsors when it comes to property. There were a lot of sponsors who were understanding of the positions that they were going through. And when the sports started coming back, of course, it was behind closed doors. We learned a lot more about bio bubbles and how you can go ahead to secure certain tournaments for them to happen. And when those sports events started, now it was the time for the property to innovate and give back to the sponsors, right? Now, during the lockdown, we saw the properties had to rethink activation, because you didn't have people on the ground now. They were all behind closed doors. So there were a lot of inventions that we saw when it comes to activating properties, right? So were there any that stood out for you? Any of your experience that you remember?
More than inventions, I think there were innovations, because brands didn't stay away from their original objectives, right? It's not like, okay, now I can't. One of the properties that we do a lot was Bad Road Buddies, which is a two-wheeler property where we connect. excuse me, where we connect with two-wheeler and SUV bikers and drivers, and engage with them on a weekend for their drives. Now, that's essentially just to build communication and that community strength for us, right? We didn't change that. What we did is we took it to a digital space, and we had an eBRB, and we placed it in two buckets. One was Tech Talk, which was basically talking tech around bikes, cars, safety, getting perspective, and second one was Heart to Heart, where we got in, I won't say influencers, but just generally old hands at riding, at driving, from that local community to come and speak about their experiences. So, there's a guy called Bullet Boss who's been riding since 50s, I think. He's got so many experiences in terms of biking. He's done things which people now are, looking and saying, okay, let's do it in groups and go to Ladakh. And he's been there, done that. And getting his perspective on things is just unique, right? So that's what we did. So we innovated. And across the world, I saw a lot of brands do that. I think in terms of an example, what Burger King did with Stevenage.
Oh yeah, that was brilliant,
right? So they wanted to engage with communities. They wanted to do all of that. They just looked at, okay, e-gaming, esports is the future in any case. So let's fast forward and look at how we can engage the community there. And what they did with Stevenage and getting that sponsorship deal done, and then but linking it back to online and then getting points and going back to the store was brilliant. So I don't know if it was something that rose out of the pandemic as such, but it was during that period, right? So that worked brilliantly. And I think taking a property from on ground to digital is not simply about just doing an e-event. It's making sure that the objectives are still met, right? So,
very interesting.
Example of VRB, it was to engage with the community and win share of heart. And that's what we did online as well. So we were looking at winning share of heart.
For anyone who hasn't seen this Stevenage activation, you really must. It's one of the most incredible things that I've ever come across. It really puts a smile in your face when you understand what they did and how they did it. Now we talked about esports, right? Now it's a growing industry, and absolutely fueled by the pandemic, right? But we're going to talk a little more about the sponsorship industry and the stakeholders involved, right? We've seen that cricket has been absolutely dominant when it comes to the sponsorship industry in India, and because they're the biggest sports in India, right? Since the World Cup wins, we've seen a really good grassroots structure, which has routed out some of the best talents around the world when it comes to cricket. Now, we have a lot of upcoming leagues. We have a lot of upcoming properties as well. So do you see from a sponsor industry, from brand perspective, are the sponsors now pivoting towards sports other than cricket? And again, we're talking about objectives. So what could that objective be that they would do the same for?
Yes, I mean, we've seen a lot of properties come up, and especially properties that are targeting different sets of audiences now. So, for example, kabaddi, right? Pro kabaddi is a brilliant example where it's a league that's national and it connects with tier two, tier three rural fantastically well. And even within the metros, right? It talks to a different strata of people who have actually played that game, and that's why it's so strong. And then you look at the brands that are there, perfect matches, right? So Tata might be there in cricket as well when they're putting the Nexon out there, but when they talk to the kabaddi audience, they're talking about one of their pickup trucks or in that range. So brilliant, right? So you can go both ways, like for a brand like Tata and in the auto space there. So there are brands who are looking at these new properties. Now, if you look at ISL as well, right? Uh, at Nike, there used to be an adage like hockey was for our fathers, cricket is for us,
Yeah,
football is for the future.
that's very true. Yeah.
And if you're looking at picking on the a sponsorship for future generations or for the next wave, football is a brilliant property to pick up. And what football probably gives you, which cricket can't, is that engagement aspect.
That's right. That's
Right?
very true.
A brand is looking for that. You go there. If a brand has a strategy like Apollo Tyres, which is global, right? We are a Indian brand, but we're going global. We've got business interests in Europe, North America, South Africa, Southeast Asia. Then you want to pick up on one story, right? It's easier to talk sponsorship that way. Football becomes a lot more easier for us to go down that route. We will pick up local sports properties or local icons
Correct.
to address local market needs, but in general, the story then becomes football.
Talking about objectives, Remus, we've seen a recent boost in fintech companies entering the sports sponsorship space, right? We've seen Paytm, Cred obviously was really huge. We saw Upstocks coming in and partnering with ICC recently. Now, what do you think the objective of these fintech companies are when they're trying to get into the sports industry?
In my mind, and it's clear awareness.
Absolutely.
As you said, right? Cricket is the biggest sport in the country. It's the one thing that unites the whole country, right? Even Bollywood does it because you have movies which are Tollywoods and Mollywoods of the world in South, and then you have Punjab and the Bhojpuri film industry. So even in that sense, Bollywood, it's all segregated. But cricket unites the country, and with properties like the IPL or even the ICC tournaments, you get great eyeballs there. So if you want awareness for a brand, you come in, and you partner with one of these leagues or one of the teams there in pure branding sense, right? There is an element of engagement that you can do. I mean, and that's why sponsorship is beautiful, right? Because it gives you that. But as the primary objective is awareness. You've seen it with a few years ago you had Oppos and Vivos, etc., coming in and sponsoring the BCCI, etc. Now that is moving on. They're still there, but now you're getting the Baijus of the world. You're getting on academies coming in, things like that. So these industries need awareness to get that spike in, and that's what they're doing.
Now, let's move on to the World Cup, 2011 World Cup, one of the biggest sporting events happening in India, and India was the favorite. So, talk to me, Remus. Tell me, how was it when you were working with ICC and the 2011 World Cup came up? What was it that your job was, and how was that experience?
So the way we structured the ICC, the 2011 World Cup, commercial rights are all managed by the ICC. So but the delivery of that, right, you need the local boards to help and
Yeah.
you with. And given how Indian sponsorship was 2011, it's moved a long way. I mean, IPL had just come out in 2008-9. So commercial rights, understanding hospitality, understanding all that was quite different, to say the least. And so you dealt with various levels of stakeholders. I think that's the right word to use there. In terms of getting what you need to make sure your sponsor is first delivered what is his obligation, contractual obligation, and then working beyond that to make sure that activations happen, etc.
Yeah.
And unlike any other country in the world, Indian cricket is a power center, powerhouse. So we had Mr. Pawar, who was the ICC president at that time. But at the same time, right, on the flip of it, we had Mr. Jaitley, who was DDCA president. We had Mr. Modi, who's now prime minister, was GCA president. Mr. Srinivasan from Chennai. So there was a lot of pressure from that level, in terms of delivering. And you're not directly talking to that level. Obviously, you were talking to the second tier, on an operational side of things. So there were multiple conversations, and you had to make sure you had to balance out these conversations to be politically correct, as well as make sure your obligations were met on one side, right? Then there's this whole different layer with security and the police, where
Yeah.
In India, you like having worked with the ICC, been lucky enough to do that. When you're planning a tournament with, say, in the Caribbean or in South Africa or in the UK, wherever else, you have a conversation with the local body, security level agencies come in, the police comes in, and there's a plan in place. The same thing does happen here. No doubt about it. It does happen in India. But that information percolating down to the last level, right? So the guy who's on the counter or on the gate, he's not got the information that's been discussed in. So he's there to stop people. His job is to stop people, which is fine because he needs to stop people. But who are the people that are supposed to come in? What are the protocols meant for them, etc. So it's always, but it's fun. It's different. It helps. I think the World Cup in India makes you be more innovative. Working in India makes you be more innovative, and then when you're working with the ICC and the local bodies, brilliant. Just that innovation element of it goes up. Jugaad, we say.
when it comes to the Indian sports industry, the layers of individuals that you need to deal with.
But by far the best experience,
Do you remember where you were when we won the World Cup?
Yeah, I was on the boundary line, saw the six.
Oh.
You were supposed to get the ball because it was meant to go for an auction. Then somebody was running helter-skelter. Then suddenly we saw the Indian team come down. We had security cordon. Oh, it was
like... It must have been an experience.
The beauty was, I think, somewhere just before that, maybe an over or something before that, the stadium started singing Vande Mataram.
Yeah, I remember that.
Being there, just goosebumps. So that was it. I actually don't remember too much of that day. It was just so many things happening, but of the game specifically, right? You remember things around the game. But I was, I needed to, so the offices were behind the side screen, and I needed to cross across for something. So I was there, obviously making sure that the ball was being bowled, etc. And I only remember Virat getting out. He was caught and bowled, right? Because I was behind the side screen waiting for something to happen, and there was a
that Dilshan catch was incredible. I remember.
Yeah, so I went and I like, shucks, and I was like, damn, I better get out of here because he's going to walk across, and you don't want to be in someone's line of sight when they just got out. So
very cool.
That was one thing I remember from the game itself. But otherwise, brilliant. I mean, the whole tournament, UV's innings in the quarterfinal, every game, Sachin's 100 in Bangalore. So because I was managing the commercial rights, and the India games are the biggest, I think I saw all the India. I was there for all the India games except for the Bangladesh game where they opened in the tournament in Dhaka, and the India-Netherlands game in Delhi. But other than that, I was there for every other game. So it was brilliant.
Amazing stuff. What an experience to have. All right, now we'll move on. We'll look into Apollo Tyres. So Apollo Tyres in 2007, they acquired Vredestein, right? Which is Vredestein, correct? Vredestein. Now, following that was the sponsorship agreement with one of the biggest European clubs there ever was. So was this acquisition that happened was a part of that sponsorship? Was these two connected to raise awareness about the brand in European market?
So the Vredestein acquisition, right? So, and before that, Apollo had looked at a couple of other acquisitions, but that was, Apollo's intent to go global as well. And if you're going an Indian company going global, you want to have that credibility, visibility,
Of
among
course.
key stakeholders. So yes, football was the chosen route, and at that time, from the assets that were available, and having done due diligence, obviously this was before my time, but having sat with the senior management and understood that it was to make sure that there was a brand that was globally recognized and had the credibility. You know, so the partnership actually first started off as a regional partnership only for this market, Indian market, and then it became a global partner in the next right cycle. So it's been
Okay then.
so since that has happened. But yeah,
So
so it is definitely, as you correctly said, it's a global brand, and if you want to have a property that you can activate across all markets, you need to have a brand like United, partnering you. So it doesn't matter if you're a United supporter, but the fact that I have a United legend coming and talking to me, I'm a football fan, and that's big enough, right?
and talking about objectives, so because of the objective of raising global awareness, to see everything lining up, really, really interesting. So now coming to partnership, right? United we play. Now, a pan-India initiative, one of my favorite, right? Where one of my favorite activations that I have ever seen. Now, tell us a little bit more about this initiative and how important do you think such initiatives are when it comes to the grassroots development of a particular sport in a country, right? When it comes to football, there's a lot of debate with regards to whether the foundation has been created or whether an up-down approach has been taken or the bottom-top approach has been taken when it comes to the tournament. So give us your views with regards to this.
So when we sat down and we came up and came up with United We Play from a business objective, right? It was very simple that we need to somewhere target the premium SUV four-wheeler community. Right? That's very important to us. Obviously, the two-wheeler community gets covered just by being partnered with United and doing activations with the supporters clubs, etc. But it was also important for us to reach out to the rural community at some level because that's a huge chunk of our business, right? From a business side of things. Now, when you look at football, right, when you have a brand like United, you want to win share of heart. Yeah. And I'm using this term share of heart simply because with tires as a category, it's a grudge purchase. You're going to buy a set of tires only when you absolutely need to, right? My tires are worn off, 30,000 done, etc., etc. I will go and buy a tire. So when somebody actually goes in to buy a tire, you want them to feel like, yeah, United at some level have that connection, and Apollo because of that, and then that influences his purchase decision at that point in time. So United We Play in the urban areas was to focus on kids who have an interest in football, but their parents as well. And in the rural areas, similar, right? So I am doing something for the kids of my stakeholders, the farmers who use our tractor tires and the truck drivers and bus drivers, etc.
Yeah.
Right? That is the pure business sense of how we're looking at it, right? And it's important to understand that because most brands or most organizations only look at their business objectives first. So even if you go back to Stevenage, they needed to drive people into their stores. Okay. Right? So I'm not going to go into the store and buy one burger. I will always buy a couple more, whatever else. Right? So this was our business objective. So when we looked at it, how you've correctly said, right? So is it important to go bottom up or top down? You need to have an approach which is layered across three parameters or three levels, right? So obviously you have the top, the league itself, the Super League, have that visibility. So there's a pathway for people to go up. Then you have the grassroots structure, which is important to get people having the right technical know-how. But the grassroots structure needs to be supported with a social structure. We need to move India from being a sports watching nation to a sports playing nation. If you don't have that, then you're only going to get the 500 kids who come in. How are they going to be challenged? We need the 5,000 kids who are also playing besides this come into the structure for the 500. So United We Play is that grassroots structure, but we're also supporting it with some other initiatives that we do. So we have GTD pitches, which are, again, coming back to the tire industry. All these AstroTurf pitches that you see, they use rubber crumb, which comes from recycled tires. So we are, looking at recycled pitches, astroturf pitches across the country to give people access to sport and let them come and train there. In the rural areas, we are looking at our pockets, our important key markets, and the sport that's big there, and supporting them with sports equipment as well as doing maybe an upgrade on the sports facilities that are there. I'm not saying we're going and laying out astroturf pitches there, no, but if they're playing
Understood.
a mud chut surface, let's make sure it's flat and stone free, and that's what we're doing. Give them new nets, give them new, poles for volleyball, etc., whatever. So all of that is actually the environment around United We Play. So United We Play is the first, we can say, gratification at one level in India. And then there's a tiered approach where you have 12 cities, or we're going on 12 markets, getting the kids from there, talent scouting with Man United soccer schools, getting our local coaches involved with the Man United soccer schools coaches, designing a program which is India centric, and now actually more than India centric, it's going to be SAARC centric, because we see traction from Bangladesh and Nepal as well, and Sri Lanka. So making sure that it's at that level, getting the cream of the talent from there,
Yeah.
right? And then we're looking to see whether they can train with the under 18 teams of United, under 18, under 17 teams of United, right? That training, most likely wherever it happens, India, there, depending on travel restrictions, etc., whatever. So last year we did an engagement with them, right? The under 18 kids spoke with the kids there, and there was that exchange. But this is just the beginning, right? I personally don't see a super champion coming out of this right now. If we do, brilliant, great, super, lucky. But this is how it needs to start building, right? And Apollo can't do it alone. We have the ISL teams also partnering with us. So through the ISL, we have Go the Distance Heroes, where we are recognizing people who are using sport to build their communities. So whether it is, Vijay Balse with Slum Soccer, or Aditi Chauhan here with She Kicks, and so many, Jude Felix in Bangalore with hockey. So not necessarily just football, but encouraging people to use sport to reach out and build their communities. And in that sense, we're strengthening our network and making sure that at least the right resources are available everywhere. So from a sporting sense, it is this, but from a business sense, we now have access to the parents. So whenever we do a grassroots program in a particular city and we are doing a scouting, when the parents come there with their their vehicles are given a tire health checkup, right? And car, two-wheeler, whatever else it is. Okay, your tires are good. They need to be swapped over. They need to be, rotated. They need to this is it, and leave information of the nearest dealer in that region or area for them to go there. And in the rural areas, it's just share of heart, right? Because sport is a way out for these kids.
There's one part that you said. You talked a lot about how this is going to focus on the talent. And then you said that this is just the beginning, and everybody has to come in together to build this foundation and to make things more a sports playing nation, not a sports watching. And as future sports industry professionals, including me and everybody else who might be watching, that's a very key aspect for us to understand, that we need to change it from a sports watching to a sports playing nation. Very well said. Now, thank you for that, Remus. So now we'll come to sponsorship again. So I love this aspect of sponsorship. So when we talk about sponsorship, naming rights, according to me, is like the king of sponsorships, right? Now we see huge numbers that come in for naming rights when we see private stadiums out there in America, in NFL, in MLB, etc., etc. Now I want to know from your perspective. Understandably, most of the stadiums that we have in India are government owned or leased out by the government, right? So the naming rights become an issue when it comes to that. But we've seen public-private initiatives come up when it comes to stadiums, correct? We've seen Trans Stadia, which is a high-class stadium that's come up recently, that's come up in Gujarat. Now, my question to you is, do you see the naming rights coming into the Indian sports industry in the future? Do you think there'll be a day where we'll have a
Yeah,
brand sponsoring a naming rights of a particular stadium.
it's already there, right? And if you look at how our sports industry has grown over the last few years, decades, cricket has been the predominant driver of sports in India and commercialization of sport in India. But as you correctly said, also, like a lot of our stadiums are government owned, or some government entity owns them in that sense, or the cricket board or body owns them.
Correct.
But there has been, right? So, for example, Wankhede Stadium, both the ends are Tata End and Garware End.
Yeah.
Those are corporate entities who paid for that. Now, what happens over a period of time because of commercial rights, so IPL, ICC, we don't allow other brands to be named or called in. You don't realize it, but it's been there. Right now, recently with the Ahmedabad Stadium, also it's the Adani and Ambani.
Ambani and yeah.
So they paid for that, right? Naming rights of a particular stand or a section of the stadium. And I know that when ISL does a lot of, all the teams, ISL teams do a lot of these, or even IPL teams do a lot of these. On the ticket, they kind of say, okay, this is the XYZ entry gate or whatever. So they're trying to get into that space. The Sahara Stadium, or what's called the Sahara Stadium, the MCA Stadium, Pune, that was a commercial naming rights deal, right? So Sahara Group actually paid the MCA X amount of money. I don't remember what it was, and then the amount was not paid, so that's why they've pulled down the Sahara board, and it's now the MCA Stadium. But that was a naming rights deal, which happened in 2009 or so. So it's been there. It's there in different ways and forms. But till teams start owning their own assets, you're never going to get it, right? Because you're going to do it only for that tournament, and then it's during the IPL it's called that, then during the bilateral series it's called something else, and during a private event it's called something else, which will never work. But and this is because we have a franchise system, we don't have a club system. So once that happens, you'll probably get that. Whether it will happen, it could happen, because I can see a few of the teams looking at building their own physical assets, structures, etc. in long term. And I'm talking about both from football perspective as well as cricket. So cricket now, Reliance has that property outside in New Bombay also. So they've built it. It's called Reliance, obviously, but yeah, the Geo Stadium or Geo facility or something.
Very interesting. Really cool. Now we'll jump into the cryptocurrency getting involved in the sports industry. Now, of course, when it comes to cryptocurrency itself, as somebody who likes to invest in things, I've tried to do my own research, and it's you definitely see two extremes of it, right? Now we have non-fungible tokens that have started coming up. Now, recently, I think the Brazil team announced that they have an exclusive NFT partner that's come on board. Now, NFTs create a digital space which is exclusive to a particular owner. Now, when it comes to the sports industry, exclusivity is one of the biggest factors that's there, right? The fans' mindset leads to a jersey being sold for thousands of dollars because he's a fan and the exclusivity aspect he's getting. Where do you see this NFT space coming into the sponsorship industry, and how do you think that it's going to affect the same?
So it's already coming. So it's already there. I've been privy to a few conversations, both from companies that build these platforms, as well as from brands or rights holders that have the assets, right? And in the cricket space, it's entering there. I know people are talking to the ICC with regards to having a crypto specifically for cricket and specifically for ICC as well. Can't say too much about it because it's confidential in that sense. It's still being there. But yeah, I think so NBA has done something brilliant, right? And they've killed it in that sense. They underplayed and they undervalued it. And
it went really high in the bidding.
Really high. So there is the potential is there. With the NBA, the commercial rights were a little easier because they owned everything in terms of this. With the ICC, they do own most of it, but there is certain broadcast restrictions. So it's like now, for example, if I take Yuvraj's 6 sixes, right, and only take that whole over. At some level, there is a broadcast restriction which says nobody can use more than 30 seconds of a particular of footage and things like that. So how does that fall into that? So there are some things need to be worked around it, but it's there. People are already getting interested in it. It's easier to do something where, say Yuvraj signs a bat, there's a Yuvraj's digital signature or Sachin's digital signature can be, made into an NFT and put out there. I was reading somewhere that one of the memes of that Pakistani guy with the jacket standing like that.
Yeah.
That he's
looking at the dropped catch. Yeah.
Catch, exactly. So that he's thinking of putting his that image, that meme as an NFT, which I don't think he can do because he doesn't own the rights to it. Because as soon as you buy it, it's a contract. That contract is with the rights holder. I don't think so. So I won't say it's a gray area. It's an evolving area, and I see a lot of collectibles, etc. Because the collectibles business is huge, right? The collectibles business has not even been tapped into in India, and I'm talking skill. So then the digital space is still that much more open, right? So today, none of the cricketers, or even if they do, their rights are not being maximized on collectibles itself, right? So whether it is a bat signed by Sachin or a bat signed by Virat or MS or whoever, right? It hasn't been. Jerseys are lying around with everybody and not been no certificates, etc. Things like that. So
yeah, that's a major tip to future talent representatives, right there.
Yeah, but even with ICC, right? So we used to do a lot of memorabilia to sponsors, etc., which we would get and sign and frame it and everything else and send it across. But at that point in time, and this is 2010, 11, right? Certification wasn't something that we thought about a lot.
Yeah.
So it's changed now because I know I get stuff from United and there's always a certificate with it if there's a...
Very, very interesting. It'll be interesting. So as you said, it's an evolving field. We're going to have to see case by case how it's dealt with. And it's going to affect a lot of aspects. I mean, every aspect of sports industry, I believe. From a broadcasting sense, that's a whole different podcast altogether too. But very, very interesting to see. Now, coming to the last question of it all. Over the last few decades, we saw data becoming the key drive when it comes to sponsorships, right? We have objectives, we have return on those. There are numbers that are decided that are to be hit. And now we have a better way of analyzing a partnership and the returns from the same. Now, when the lockdown happened, the pandemic happened, there was sporadic technological development that happened in the field, correct? Now, according to you, as an expert in the sponsorship industry, how do you see the future of the sponsorship industry in India?
So India's sponsorship industry is probably catching up now with the West in a lot of sense. So the US is, say, 20 years ahead of us. The UK is 5 years ahead of 5 to 8 years ahead of us. And that gap is bridging, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of brands still in India, it was a conversation I'm having yesterday with somebody as well, are still looking at the branding aspect of it, right? So how many times my logo was visible, how big my logo was visible, can I see it twice? So whether it was YouGov or MyGov, or Nielsen, whoever else, that's what they're looking at in terms of, giving them that value from a sponsorship. What I've seen over the last few years, a lot more is rights holders relying on qualitative data to ensure that you keep these are your business objectives. So your awareness has gone up, your brand love has gone up, your P-scores have gone up, your top of mind, your propensity to purchase, all of those things are going up as well within this segment, right? So we're seeing that evolve now. And I can see a few agencies also trying to, they're doing a better job at merging these two aspects, the quantitative as well as the qualitative, to make sure you have a brand is getting the kind of value that they're looking for from a partnership. So it might take a little more time in India, is my view, because a lot of the sponsorship deals are still being run by media agencies, and a lot of sponsorships are being managed by brand managers, rather than a sports or a sponsorship expert. to understand that the value that actually comes out from a sponsorship is not just what you see in terms of the logos on the perimeter board or the the ad seconds that you get, but it's the engagement opportunities that you have from a sponsorship. So once that can be tapped into and data or your measurement tool can tap into that more effectively, including when you're looking at digital, what is the engagement the post got? What is the positivity aspect? So there is sponsorship that can be negative. So Coca-Cola, was it a good thing that Ronaldo moved it from here to there or not, right? So great value. So in terms of numbers, in terms of conversation, in terms of everything else, Coke would have got tremendous quantitative value because the dollar value of that conversation, the repeats of that, all of that would have gone up tremendously. But was it good or bad? Was it positive or negative? Right? Did the brand get some more love because of that, or was there a negative perception created because of that incident? So those elements need to come out. So once that happens and data technology, your tool can analyze that, then you're in a better space. Otherwise, it's just purely simply going to be you got so many views on it, and this is the dollar value of those views. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Could I just ask you a little more on the virtual reality, artificial intelligence space with the same question?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm just trying to understand. We've seen virtual reality, artificial intelligence, all of these coming up in the space as well. Also with the esports industry too. And we talked about partnering up with different properties, focusing on the target market that you would like to focus on. But thank you so much for taking the time out. We really had a great session. I know that I've learned a lot. And as someone who wants to go ahead and make my mark in the sponsorship industry, endorsement industry in space, I've really enjoyed talking to you and conversing with you. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
My pleasure.
And I hope you have a great day. And I'm really looking forward to seeing everything else that Apollo Tyres comes up with and the United We Play program and how big an impact it's going to create on the industry of sports for India. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Take care.